I am on. You want me to take the roll?
No, I just wanted to make sure you were there, and then we'll take the roll. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yep. So welcome, everyone. I believe this is our 5th meeting, if I'm correct, for the one from May 20th. I hope everybody's doing well. Everybody's safe. It's good to kind of get back together again, although it's still virtual. I'm hoping our next meeting, which is in the latter part of June, hopefully it's going to be face-to-face and we'll be able to reconnect again. But for the moment, as a group, we still felt this was the better way to get connected. So, as usual, being a virtual meeting and not being face-to-face, we've shortened the meeting to 2.5 hours. So, quickly running through the agenda today, we'll do some roll calls and some welcomes at the beginning. We'll do the approval of the minutes. And then from there, we have some exciting presentations coming up. So we have the San Luis County Crowdsourcing Mapping Project by GEO Partners, and Steve Georgie will help us kind of facilitate that discussion. There's some interesting work that was done there, and we felt it would be good for the group to look at that. We'll take a quick break after that. Midco has also graciously agreed to come and present to us, so it'll be another service provider, and it'll be good to hear from them as well. And then we'll just kind of do the legislative updates. I know we had a lot of discussion on that last time, and Devin's going to come in and give us sort of what's happened at the legislative level and some of the discussions that have happened at the legislature there, and it'll be interesting to hear that. And then, as usual, we'll end with the 3 updates on the working groups or the subgroups, and then we'll kind of leave a few minutes at the end for some public comments or any other business. So. That's what we have on the agenda today. So excited to go through that. So with that, what we'll do now is I'll ask Diane to do a roll call so we make sure that the task force members, and you can just let us know that you're here. And then once we're done kind of going through the task force members, would like for everyone else who's dialed in who wants to announce themselves to do so at that time. And then we'll get going with the meeting after that. So Diane, with that, I'll let you do the roll call.
All right. Well, Teddy, we know you're here. Nolan Calvin?
Yes, I'm here.
Thought I saw you. Dale Cook? Dale, are you on mute? Thought I saw you had. All right. Steve Fensky?
Hello.
Hello. That was Steve? Steve Georgie?
I'm here, Diane.
All right, thank you. Shannon Hine indicated she would not be on joining today. Mark Johnson?
Yep, yes, I'm here.
Good.
I'm here. There you go. I'm here.
Bernadine?
Yes, I'm here.
Brian Cranbeer? Brian, I think I saw you earlier. Right, Micah Myers?
Here.
Ika, was that you, Micah? All right, we'll come back. Teresa Sunday?
Yeah, he's there.
I'm here.
Okay. Okay, Teresa's here. Jim Wycombe?
Yep.
Yep, okay. Paul Wirt?
I'm here.
All right, Dave Wolf?
Morning, I'm here.
Okay. Dale Cook? That's you. I saw your name up. Okay. And Brian? I saw you up too.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me, Diane?
I can hear you now. Thank you.
All right.
Great. And I think that's everyone. If Dale pops on, maybe he can speak at some point.
Sounds good. Thanks, Diane. Welcome, task force members. Oh, was that Dale? Okay, so from here, I see there's some folks that have see the names on the conference call, but then a bunch of call-ins. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, this would be a good time. Just tell us your name and the organization you're with.
This is Anna Boroff from the Minnesota Cable Association. Morning.
Morning, Anna.
Good morning. This is Christina calling with Congresswoman Angie Craig's office.
Morning, Christina.
Hi, everyone. This is Nathan Zacharias with the Minnesota Rural Broadband Coalition.
Morning, Nathan.
Good morning. Paul Deming, GEO Partners.
Morning, Paul. Good being here.
Chuck Ackman on Senator Klobuchar's staff.
Morning. Okay, I don't hear anybody else, so we'll go ahead and get started then. So first order is to approve the minutes. So in the agenda that Diane sent out this morning, the minutes for the last meeting as well as the one before that were included. We won't spend the time to go through them, but I'm assuming you've had a chance to look at them. If not, I will give it about 20 seconds or so, and then if I don't hear any updates, we can assume the minutes have been approved. So let's give it 20 seconds. No dissent or any updates required. We'll assume the minutes are approved. Okay, so on to the next task is obviously the crowdsourcing mapping project from GEO Partners, and Steve Georgie was kind enough to get us introduced and put this topic forward. I know it's something we had discussed last time. That was a successful initiative there, and good insights had come out. So we felt like this would be a good time to be able to present to the group. So I think it was Paul that was here from GEO Partners. I will turn it over to you or to you, Steve. I don't know who's going to kick it off, but walk us through some of the findings there.
Steve, go ahead.
Well, again, we started this project about a month ago, a partnership between St. Louis County and the Range Association of Municipalities and Schools. We're serving as a host for the map, which is online and active, so anybody that takes the test, if they want to take the time, they can look at our RAM's website and zoom into a location and actually find the spot where they took their test from. As of this morning, I think we're 4 tests under 6,000 results. So great participation. And the map is so nice because we can look at the map, we can zoom into various areas, townships, locales, and identify where we're short, where we're not getting test results coming in, and reach out to that community and try and spur some more test results. But it tracks every user or ISP provider, I should say. Keeps track of the number of test results from those providers and averages the download and upload speeds for those tests. So it's going to be great information to have when any of those locations want to apply for federal or state grant funding. So I believe there was going to be a demonstration, or I don't know what happened with that, Diane.
Steve, we're good. During the introduction announcement, one reason I couldn't go off of mute. So
Yep.
This is Glenn Fishbein, GEO Partners.
So yeah, Glenn is the guru behind the software, and if it's all right, he'll give a quick demonstration of what the test results have shown so far.
Okay, I'm attempting to share a screen at this point. Hopefully that's coming through.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, Steve, you underestimated the total number of tests. Although your focus was St. Louis County, the PR campaign that you waged had us picking up tests from all over the state, including parts of Wisconsin. So we turned out to have a much broader reach than I think any of us imagined. So what we're looking at is an overview of the state of Minnesota and where all the testing has come from to this point in time. Chain just launched yesterday, so that's beginning to fill in as well. But focusing on what we can see through this, as we just look at St. Louis County, these are the ISPs that we have captured and their average performance over all the tests they've done. We can take a sort of a granular view about where these folks are and what the performance is overall. So we can see, for example, that's CenturyLink providers, this is Charter Communications providers, this is MediaCom, and so on and so forth. So we get a better view as to how people are performing in there. Plus we have no service addresses, which are the ones in black. So as we look at this as an overall view, what we're seeing is that each of those dots represents either a speed test that was performed or a no service address that was entered manually. So to understand how we can use this, we're going to zoom in a little bit and take a look at some of the areas that are showing larger numbers of unserved or underserved households. These become potential grant application areas. So first of all, the question is, okay, where do you have good service? And that's going to be the green areas. So for example, if we're looking into, say, Virginia, as we get in closer, we start seeing that we can tell that there's pretty good services in Virginia. Now, there's some people who have less quality services, but we can infer from the quality that we're seeing off of the green dots and the locations of the households there, that if you're not getting quality service, it's either because you chose not to or because you can't afford it. But clearly, an area like this is not going to be something where you want to be pushing for grant applications. And you can see that we can go down to individual households. The public version that Steve has on his site, these dots are randomly drifted so that you can't really identify whose house it is, but in this mode we have sufficient granularity to do that. So what we start looking for is, can we identify areas that are unserved or underserved? And we have a couple of ways of doing that. The first is we could just look at people who have reported either no service or they have only satellite service. So we can toggle in and out and start identifying areas where there's a claim or actual no service area. And from that, then we can start taking a more detailed look as to what's going on there and what the previous 477 data might have said about those areas. So we'll take this cluster here, where it appears that there may not be service there, and we'll see what's actually going on a block group by block group level. So what we're seeing now is a different way of looking at this. Each of these areas here is an individual block group where FCC 477 data has been collected. And what we see off to the right-hand side here is this is the FCC 477 data up in this section here. And the speed test data that we collected is this group down here. So we can start comparing what's happening in terms of very granular detail. And one of the things we would notice here is that MediaCom did in fact claim to be servicing the area, and we do have a reasonably good MediaCom test that occurred in that area. But we also see CenturyLink is present in this area for real, and they are not listed in the FCC 477 data. So in a sense, that's good. That means services are expanding into this area. And then we take a look at what's happening here in the no service areas. Are they really no service or not? And one of the things that we can start looking at is in this area where we do have some good quality speed tests occurring, where we also have claims of no service, the ISPs in this case are AT&T Mobility and T-Mobile USA. So essentially, even though we are supposed to have CenturyLink and MediaCom here, these individuals, these households have resorted to cellular phone data, either as hotspots or something on that order. So this brings into question, should we be taking a closer look at this area? And is this an area that we might want to consider for a grant? Another thing that we might want to notice is that you'll notice the block groups have different colors. The ones in brown are not eligible for RDOF funding. Therefore, they would be ignored by an ISP in the reverse auction that's coming forth from the FCC. The green areas are eligible. So this is something else we can take a look at when we get into the granular detail there. Now, one of the things that we have to establish as we go into this process is whether or not this data is going to be usable, either to challenge the FCC data or to resist a challenge from an incumbent. So we have a way of looking at this from a statistical analysis point of view. Each block group, we know the number of households in the block group. We have a statistically calculated sample requirement to be at a 95% confidence interval, plus or minus some error, in this case either 5% or 25%. And we could start looking at the granular detail of an individual block group and see what our sample requirements are to statistically claim that this is or is not good data at this point in time. So for example, in this block group, we've got 25 households, we've got 2 samples. If we wanted to be at 95% confidence interval, plus or minus 25% of the measurement, we need 7 more samples to occur in this area. If this becomes a target area for a grant application, then we would encourage more sampling to be done in order for this to be something that you could survive a challenge, at least statistically speaking, which I think is a pretty fundamental value of this type of mapping, is that we can actually claim that it does have statistical validity. So as we move further out, then what we can start looking at is we can start taking a look, let me refresh this, at, well, how would we identify areas that we want to take a look at in more detail? So one of the ways we do this is we can toggle also between low quality service and good quality service. So what we're seeing here is anything that has better than 20 megabits per second is basically removed from consideration. So now we can start identifying additional areas where capabilities may be required. And so just as another example, we'll take a look at this area up in here, where apparently we've got, in this case, less than 10 megabits per second reported. Now what also is coming into view from this point of view is we start seeing these little blue dots. This is CAF2 installation history. So the history here says that Frontier Communications did a number of installs or was paid to do installs for 10 meg down, 1 meg up. And what we're actually seeing, though, when we look at the speed test content in this area, is that the performance is significantly lower than that 10 down, 1 up. So there's an area here whereby somebody may want to challenge Frontier, by example, as to what did you really do in this area. So again, here's a case where we would want to take a more sampling approach and start trying to figure out what happened in 2020, or when the CAF data was in 2017. And the current speed test results seem to indicate that whatever happened there, it was not a 10-1 scenario. So the state might find this to be of value in questioning what the ISP performance actually has been. We also have another layer, it's a much more granular layer. This is MLab speed test data, which we can use to supplement this. In this area, what we're seeing is Frontier was the only provider, and their average download speed was 2.85 megabits per second. Their average upload is 0.5, which is consistent with what we're seeing in terms of our testing here as well. So as an overview, the concepts here are that we have the ability now to identify areas that have problems. We have the ability to challenge FCC data. We have the ability to challenge ISP challenges to grant applications, and we now have the ability to take a look at the performance of ISPs in actual service areas. So that's my real brief presentation. Steve, anything you care to add?
Well, I would certainly allow Teddy, if there's anybody with any questions for Glenn.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks, Glenn, for the update on that one. It's super interesting information. How was the test taken today?
the individual goes to a website. It's launched from Steve's case. It's through his website, or they can just go to a publicly available website, which looks like this, and they can, if they're on a device that has a GPS in it, they will also see an option whereby they can just use the GPS coordinates, which is not present here because I don't have a GPS on my machine. You can enter an exact address, partial address, or an address, no available services. If you've got the code, you can see the high-resolution detail map that we were just looking at. And then, if you wish, you can enter your email address if there's a possibility you might want to elicit contact from the organization that's managing that. So what happens then when you enter an address, you basically are entering your address. So in my case, this is where I live. And then you can enter optionally how much you're paying per month for internet access, and then you just go into a speed test mode. And what this is doing is it's just basically trying to figure out, what your performance is. If you repeat the test from approximately the same address within maybe 30 feet or so, it will count you as having done multiple tests. So the speed test basically is just a very boring vanilla speed test. Doesn't take very long to run. You'll notice that we've already picked off who my ISP provider is. I'm running off the cell phone. And then the test is complete. One other factor that is of value, we think, is that the data that you're looking at here, if you're running off of the RANS mapping, for example, we can have all the data that we've collected extracted in a CSV file. This can be used for whatever types of analysis people may find appropriate. It can go into our own GIS system. It shows the latitude, longitude, critical characteristics of the speed test, whether or not there have been any repeats, what the cost numbers may have been, and so on and so forth. So we have this, in this case, which is only dumping what's in the window field of view, and that was 4,099 tests that we just got downloaded. So this can be imported into any other application for further analysis.
And I know when you just did the test right now, you were using your cell phone. Are you able to tell whether somebody's using their cell phone and whether they have a wired connection or?
Yes. These are what are called MCC and MNC codes. If it's a cell phone, let's go see if we can find AT&T Mobility. There. These are all cell phone connections right here. If these numbers are 0, we know it's fixed. If these numbers are non-zero, we know it's
generation farmer. We grow wheat, sugar beets, and soybeans in Halleck, Minnesota.
Glenn, do we still have you?
Yep, I'm still here. I was listening to the farmer again.
Yeah, sorry, continue.
All right, so yes, we can pick off what a cellular connection versus any other connection. These two codes are returned from our ASN lookup if it is a cellular provider.
Got it. And how about if someone, would there be a difference if someone, for example, is at home and using their Wi-Fi doing the test versus if they're kind of wired into their network?
Well, the answer is absolutely yes. The question is it relevant? For example, if we take a look into the Duluth area here, there's no question that Duluth is well served. And some of these red dots may be because somebody's got a crappy, and some are not. But as we move out into other areas where we do not see green dots, we know that these are relatively underserved areas. So the performance of the Wi-Fi may drop it by 10-20%, possibly more. But we're not going to see congestion like we would in downtown Duluth. And a lot of the choices here appear to be correlated with the service providers rather than the actual quality of equipment. So for example, if we take a look at Charter, which is a pretty darn good provider in this area, We can see that there are a couple of low-quality connections in here, but the balance are in what we call the green and yellow, and that's pretty good. So if we take a look in here, that charter communication location, 4 meg down, 11 meg up, that's probably a crappy connection at that point. They're actually getting a faster upload speed than download speed. So we can discount these, but from a statistical point of view, overall the data is going to be supportable. Any single case, not, but the mass of the data, almost certainly.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Absolutely, please. I was just going to say that.
Okay, sorry. This is Mark Johnson on the task force. Glenn, is there any differentiation between business and residential, and what are your thoughts on that, I guess?
A lot of the businesses are running their own ISP connections. Let me give you an example of here we'll call the state of Minnesota business. And what's happening here for those 265 tests, these are state employees running through the state VPN. Virtual private networks will show up as the originating ISP, which in this case is the state of Minnesota, irrespective as to who the actual provider is. The one thing we cannot break out is who's providing the services under virtual private network, and the reason is virtual private network is supposed to be private, and it works. So in those cases, we have to discount those numbers because we really don't know what their actual service provider was. So we'll see also level 3 communication and level 3 parent. These are businesses, clearly, but that they're easily identifiable. We also have Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Minnesota, another virtual private network sitting up here. These things are pretty clearly, easily distinguishable from the residential activities.
Other questions? Bernadine, did you have a question? I'm looking at it in the chat.
Well, this is really amazing data. I mean, it's so refreshing to see a clear picture of what is. And, from where I sit, it's so helpful to have decision makers have good information. And as a task force, my mind goes to the question of what's our role in encouraging the state to make an investment that we could have this kind of a information available statewide. We could just make such wiser decisions, and the ability to challenge inaccurate data is amazing. So my question goes, as a task force, what's our response to this opportunity? I want to thank Steve for bringing it to us, and to think about, what can we do? What role can we play in ensuring that the great state maps that we have, and we're ahead of a lot of states, reflect this kind of capacity that we now could have to really see the picture. So it's a question to the task force. What's our role here in responding to this information?
And if I may, Teddy, yesterday we got Cooch County and Itasca County both agreed to do speed test projects with GEO Partners. I'm also talking to a couple of other neighboring counties, but because of this activity, I think Paul Deming has developed a statewide proposal. Whether he wants to talk about that to the task force, but I think it would be a great investment or a recommendation by the task force to have a statewide outsourcing map project completed. So we have tremendous advantage when it comes to RDOF opportunities and other federal funding, not just relying on our state border-to-border grants for completion of the mission. So I'll leave it up to Paul.
Steve, thank you. I believe that's a conversation for another meeting. We certainly, our intention today was not to take too much time. We're really thankful for the opportunity that we have in St. Louis County, and but yeah, definitely this is a conversation for another time, and we would like to have that conversation, with the task force. Definitely, we think there's a tremendous opportunity here for the state.
Good, and following that,
Mr. Chair,
can you talk? Go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to ask, does this test take into account the end user's age of phones or modems or any other ancillary equipment when registering those tests?
No, that information is not knowable at the time the test is taken. What we rely on is the statistical sampling error rate. We know there are going to be errors in any sampling process. The issue on the sample size is to get to a confidence interval where we can say most of those errors are now taken care of. So from a statistical point of view, we want to get to a 95% confidence interval with a known error rate. And at that point in time, of course, we're going to have some bad phones. We're going to have some bad Wi-Fi. We're going to have the dog chewing on the Ethernet cable. But overall, our confidence level increases the higher the sample gets.
And this is Mark Johnson again, and I put in the chat, and I think I commented at the last meeting, and then our subgroup talked about this because speed goals and that kind of thing is part of our subgroup. And I completely agree with what you just said. It's all about the sample size. If you have a sufficient sample size, you will eliminate or diminish the effect of various variables. And we absolutely know there's variables involved in this. We did that in a regional K-12 education survey that we did, and we did speed test sampling, and it wasn't any intention to say that one or two tests can tell us a story. We needed to know that we had enough data points to be able to eliminate those variables. So I reiterate that as somebody who has done a number of statistical analyses, that is the key. And I think this is seemingly on the right track toward establishing that number that you need to help be part of the narrative. And that's the other thing I'll say is that I like projects like this to help be part of the narrative. It's one piece of the story. There's lots of pieces to the story. But this seems to be a key piece of the story to me. I'll just say that.
Other questions?
This is Steve Bensky. I'm curious if different points to do the speed test within a neighborhood other than the end. Anybody know if that's a possibility where we can maybe have less about the hardware on the end user side?
If I can address that sort of two-part, the concept on the FCC requirements are that a user has a certain download and upload capacity, be it 10.1 or 25.3. Now, the presumption is that certain types of work or economic viability occur when you have that performance. Now, to only factor in the connection between the ISP and the household does not account for the fact that some households may be running on 10, 15-year-old equipment. The economic viability is not just the ISP's connection speed, it's also the end user's access to that connection speed. So I think it's a more of a complex factor than is it a good PC, a good connection, a good service provider or not. It's also an indicator of the economic health of the community or that particular area. Testing just the circuit, in my opinion, is an error. You have to actually test the end user to get a sense for what you're looking at. In principle, the data that we can download should also be correlated with economic data as well. So my thought is you do want to go to the end user.
And that makes sense. I get that idea, but I also you have to factor in the end results. I'm curious if there's another, is there a piece of it we can take to get a more accurate picture of that in addition to what you're saying?
If the ISP will provide you the circuit type to each household in conjunction with this, then we could start correlating the two, and that might be helpful, but you'll require, the ISP would have to basically provide you with their proprietary circuit routing. It should be doable. It would be helpful.
Well, I think even the further build on the site in which you can probably test, at least from like the standpoint of a technician, if we ran our speed tests right at the DSLAM, I mean, it would look like everyone was eligible for fantastic service. The biggest areas where you're going to see the discrepancies is distance. So I mean, someone in either a subdivision or a house that's super close to the DSLAM, they're obviously going to qualify for much faster speeds than someone that might be a mile down the road, because all of the speeds that's dictating, what customers are even eligible for is based off of not even just the gauge of the wiring, how many potential splices, but it's total distance. That makes a huge difference. And really, to get the better idea, I think in that case would be not to do the speed test maybe inside the home, but at the actual network interface, if the concern is trying to bypass the customer's equipment, because then you're still getting a more accurate idea as to what you can get to the home, excluding whatever it is they might be using inside.
Well, again, I think the objective here is to provide the end user with a certain minimum standard, be it 10.1 or 25.3. The circuit itself is only part of the equation. The distance is part of the equation. The economic health of the household is part of the equation. I think that it really is a better policy issue to look at the end user performance and then start asking, what is it about this area that has that performance? Old equipment, poverty, bad circuits. But you have to know where you want to look. And I think just the circuit itself is insufficient.
So maybe one thing Steve Georgie and Glenn and Paul you can speak to is, this was obviously a crowdsourcing effort. Can you talk maybe a little bit about that crowdsourcing work that went into it? Not necessarily sort of the collection itself, but it's just posting on a site. How do we get individuals to want to participate? How do we get the word out? Things of that nature.
Well, it really started, kind of a sleepless night and thinking about the pandemic and struggles that our school districts were faced with, connecting to students for distance learning, etc. And it just seemed that the one silver lining of the pandemic and the stay-at-home order was everybody was in need of, internet and broadband services. So what a better time to do a crowdsourcing project. In RAMS, we work with our school superintendents on a monthly basis. We meet with them. So I broached this issue with them. Actually did a survey of over 25 school districts and simply asked if they would be willing to send out a notice to their students and parents asking them to run speed tests because they're basically at home. And kids are not afraid to do things like this. Sometimes parents are a little skeptical, but kids will usually run it. So we took advantage of that, and then it was pretty much social media outreach, talking to various key people. We got our local chambers of commerce to utilize their contact lists, my extensive contact list on the Iron Range and across the region. And I reached out to a friend of mine in Duluth who had a Facebook site with 15,000 members. So, that's what we've been doing since, is looking at the map, finding where we're seeing spots. We had Ely had some issues to begin with. Reached out to the mayor up there. They put it on their website, the school district. So it's just, again, that's the beauty of the map. We had problems in the Floodwood area, not getting any test results. So I got to a school board director got that out, the city council. And so that's what we're doing. Now it's cabin owners. We really want to find those rural spots around some of the bigger lakes and get those tests because, rural cabin owners now want broadband, and rightfully so. So if you're going to be stuck in a stay at home, what a better place to be than at the lake. And we have some groups right now by Lake Vermilion that are interested in broadband expansion and are working with another group that I'm working with the Blandon Foundation and the IRRB on a community broadband project. And GEO is part of that also. So we're taking really advantage of the school districts to really start moving this the information out there, and we're getting really good results by utilizing those school districts. So, but other than that, it's just finding key people in key communities and asking them to help promote it. And then we did a press release. We got some local media attention. Local publications ran it, so it kind of reaffirmed to people who are skeptical: is this a real deal or is it a scam? And just keeping after it here. So that's pretty much how we did it, Teddy.
No, thank you for that. I appreciate that. If we were to consider this as statewide, I think those are some of the things we'll have to keep in mind, right? Because that's one of the most important parts, to just get somebody to actually do the test. So.
Yeah.
Quick question for Glenn. You showed us some areas that you said were not eligible for RDOF. Is that because they had gotten funding in the past? Is that why it wasn't eligible?
The eligibility is based on primarily FCC 477 data, where vendors report adequate services. That is the FCC's own data that you were looking at.
Got it. And then when you're showing us the town of Virginia, for example, you said it may not be eligible. I mean, it may not be a good area to focus, obviously, because there's service. So there wasn't a lack of service, but there were a lot of households in the area that showed, red dots there. Is that something where we go, well, we're not focused on it because it doesn't have, we more want to focus first on the no service areas, or, should the red dots be a concern? I mean, how should I think about that when I look at it?
The way in which we approach this is eligibility to grants. For example, if you tried to get a Reconnect grant into Virginia, it's not going to happen. If you propose that the state of Minnesota fund a project in this area, again, it's not going to happen. That doesn't mean that there isn't an economics issue that could or should be dealt with. Just the current grant landscape would knock this area out of consideration.
And if I could comment, Teddy, when we surveyed Virginia School District, they found 100 students within the city limits that were not connected to the internet. They initially reported they were connected because they had a cell phone. So for some of those families making a decision, are we going to have cable TV and internet, or are you going to have a cell phone? Teenagers are going to choose the cell phone. But that same city of Virginia is interested in fiber for their business community, which they do not have at this time. So they're part of our Iron Range broadband community project right now. And, Glenn's first analysis was they're connected, so we shouldn't even worry about them. But truly, there is an interest in a fiber connection for the business center of the town. So they are included in the study, and we find that in other, Ely, the city of Ely is doing fiber to their downtown districts this summer with CTC. So we're seeing that happening on the range.
This is Mark Johnson again. May I add something? Okay. With what Steve said, I'll give you just another example. So further down toward, our neck of the woods, just north of the metro, one of our districts, Cambridge Isanti, when we did, and we did some surveying, not like this. We did a different type of survey, but and other data collection. They had a large number of students, and we're talking 100 or more families, again in that situation, who lived in the city of Cambridge or the city of Isanti, who did not have service when distance learning started. And so, they would have potentially showed up as black dots, in this situation where they said they don't have service. Doesn't mean they didn't have access to it, but when you talk about what do we do when we see some of those red dots or some of those other things, is we looked at that and said that's an affordability issue for absolutely sure. And so the district reached out to those families and found out what was the situation, and we worked with a provider, to get them some service because they do have that access. We've also found that then when we expand that survey out and look at all of the rural areas around us, we have 25%, and we're very confident of our statistics. We have 25% of our families who would be red dots, and we look at those and say those are the families where there could be a number of situations. It could be, as Nathan talked about, it could be they live on the end of the line and they can't get speeds to that household that are any better than that. It could be that they're working off the cell phone. It could be all of these different kinds of things, but they don't show up in statistics that say they don't have access, because they do. But they don't have access at a level enough to participate in, economically, whether that's in distance learning or work from home or whatever. So I like this kind of data collection to show us that hidden group. Then we have to ask the question, how do we reach them? Is it because it's affordability? Do we have to do something in that area? Is it because of the technology they're using? Is it because, then you ask all those other questions. But this gives us the data to be able to do that. And that's what I like about it.
Point. Any other questions from the group for Glenn and Paul? Hearing none. Glenn and Paul, really appreciate you taking the time to come present to us. Really relevant information. Gave us a lot to think about, and I'm starting to see there are already some recommendations that are formulating here. So that's really good. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, for your time this morning.
Thank you. Okay, so the next thing we have scheduled is a break. We're running about 12 minutes early. Totally fine. So let's do this. Let's take a 12-minute break, and we'll be back here. Let's get back up started at 11 o'clock.